You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to another podcast from SeaKayakRoots.com. I'm Simon Willis, and in this podcast we get a kayaking history lesson. Duncan Winning is the honorary president of the Scottish Canoe Association. At the place where he works, there's a collection of historic kayaks and photographs of them in use. In this podcast, he gives me a fascinating guided tour. But first, a little context. In the summer of 2007, with Callum MacLeod, I'm making a series of radio documentaries for BBC Scotland based on a classic kayak voyage. In 1934, Alistair Dunnett and Seamus Adam paddled kayaks from the River Clyde in Glasgow to Kyleakin on the Isle of Skye. Dunnett wrote a book of the adventure which was republished in May 2007 by Neil Wilson Publishing under the title The Canoe Boys. The canoes they paddled were designed by John Marshall of Queensferry and were called the Lochaber design. In the course of this interview, I discovered that they weren't a particularly good design and were quickly superseded by the Queensferry. It was that design of boat, the Queensferry, that one of the canoe boys, Seamus Adam, became the first person to paddle solo across the Minch from Skye to the Outer Hebrides in 1935. Now, over the phone, Duncan Winning had told me he had the remains of a Queensferry in the Marine Archive where he works. He agreed to dig out some photos and to show me this classic boat. What I didn't know as we walked towards the building was how many other classic boats he had in that store.
Right, this is the store. As you see, a number of kayaks. That's the Franz folder, which is a slightly different shape from most folders people think of. It's about the same length and beam as a Nordcat with a smaller cockpit. It's a Grazer, built by Otto Hahn and Graz in Austria, the early 30s. And it's known as the Kayak mit der Fosse. It's the wee fin at the back, which is an Eskimo built-in skeg. That one there is a Loch Lomond designed in the Scottish Hostlers Canoe Club after the war to be easily built, carry a 14-stone man, week's grub, his camping equipment.
What's it made of?
A pressure cooker.
Can we have a look at it? What's it made of?
Pressure cooker and a chip pan.
What, there's a chip fitting for the chip pan?
That's just a plywood frames and softwood stringers covered in canvas, which was the standard way all the sort of rigid canoes were built not all that many years ago.
Would you have a spray deck on top of this?
Oh yes, the spray deck was in two pieces. This is a kind of non-standard one because the backrest would be about there.
The backrest is a little bit of wood with a small pad on about 6 inches by 4 inches.
But quite comfortable.
Yeah?
If done properly. This one's not a terribly good one. But it'd be about there. And the spray sheet would be fitted permanently on the back here, so that area there could take very large, bulky items.
This is about 1'6" across?
A bit less than that.
Okay.
But the spray sheet forward of this would be held on with Dutch lacing. In other words, you'd have eyelets through the edge of the spray sheet and you'd have loops. That loop would come back, the next loop would go through that, and the next loop would go through that. So it took a while to go on, but you just undid the last bit and the rest would just rip off, if you wanted out in a hurry. For its time, it was very effective. A 14-foot long canoe, that's useless for the sea. Yeah. No one had cars after the war. And the longest thing you could get in the Gars van in the West Highland Line was 14 feet. End of story. You couldn't afford... Joe Public couldn't afford a folder. They had to build their own. So the boat was a very successful.
So come weekends, this would be on the train?
Uh-huh.
Brilliant. I should say we're in a pretty long old warehouse here. We've got metal...
It's a furniture factory.
Is it what?
A furniture factory.
And it's got sort of cross members in metal, and mainly here there's these how do you describe it? I suppose shelving, but it's metal shelving, isn't it?
Metal racks, that's all holding archive material waiting to be processed of Scottish industry. Indeed, you're walking past the remains of the British Marine engine building.
Hang on, Swan Hunter. That's not Scotland.
That's what I'm saying, British Marine. The reason it's here is...
Wallsend Slipway Dock. This is where I used to work down in Newcastle. These are all the businesses I actually saw close.
And who do you think closed them?
Oh, God.
There's more of the British marine engineering history surrounding you right now than anywhere else in Britain. And I would include the National Maritime in that.
So keeping on going, and the interesting thing is on top of all these shelves, every now and again you come across a kayak. What's this one?
That's a semi-replica Greenland kayak, a Glorisuit kayak, which was built to fit Gordon Brown so that he could go and give a rolling demonstration under the guidance of John Heath, the Texan, who was an expert in such matters, and that was built to go down to Machrihanish to give a demonstration to the American SEALs that were based there. Plywood hull and a canvas deck. John Heath was coming over because there was a military symposium at Machrihanish, and kayaking symposium, and he asked me to get someone who could demonstrate Inuit roles under his guidance and to get a suitable boat. Well, rather than just get a fiberglass boat, because nowadays we tend to fit in with the hips. The Inuit don't. They allow their hips to go right to the side of the boat for certain manoeuvres. So we just hurriedly built a semi-replica to go down there, and that's it. It's been used various places since, from Skye to Jersey.
Right, well, let's go and have a look at the kayak we came here for.
That lay in the back green of a lady in Cove, Kilcreggan, for a long number of years. She was John Marshall's daughter, and she was about 80 years of age when, if you like, that was rescued. It still belongs to our son, and it doesn't belong to me. It's just in here so that it doesn't deteriorate any further.
It's basically a skeleton, isn't it?
It is. It's the framework. The idea was that the bits that have rotted, I would replace in a contrasting wood colour so that it would come back to its previous shape, but it would be obvious, the bits that were new. But like many good ideas, time is disappearing, and it's hasn't happened yet, but at least it's not deteriorating further. The reason it's probably here is I have a feeling Mr. Marshall was always very economic.
This is John Marshall, the designer.
In his building methods. And I think he got his materials from the shipbreaking yards in the Forth, because that boat is built, his framework's built of teak. Otherwise it wouldn't be here.
Right, because he was in Queensferry, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And the teak, you mean that's lasted, and anything else would just rotted away by now?
Quite, because it just lay outside for years. But when you look at the frames, they're very heavily built up out of solid material. The net result is there's hardly any space in between the frames for putting kit in. And the way the backrest is fashioned there, this particular one isn't actually built to take kit at all. And the cockpit, although it's very, very long and pointed at both ends, because of the position of the backrest, when you actually sit back against it, you're quite a snug fit, because the width of the cockpit is quite narrow at that point.
This is called the what?
A Queensferry Senior. And it wasn't designed as a sea canoe, it's designed as an all-round canoe. They used these in the river as well.
But this is the sort that Seamus Adam probably went across the Minchin, or definitely went across the Minchin?
It's not the exact boat, but I'm confident that it is exactly the same design as Seamus used to paddle from Killalachalsh to Stornoway the year after they did their trip from the Clyde to Killalachalsh.
Because the one that they did, the Clyde to the Kyle in, that was, what design was that, and how was it different? It
was a Lochaber design, and it was different insofar as it was made in 3 sections. A central, very open box almost, which was held onto 2 end sections which were completely covered in canvas and sort of watertight air tanks, almost shaped tanks.
And you couldn't get into them?
No, couldn't get in, but basically they were held together by a wire which went right round a groove down the foredeck, down the stem and stern and along the keel, and was tightened up with a rigging screw to hold the whole lot together.
You sat in the central section of one of those, didn't you, at Loch Arbor, even though you haven't got one here?
I didn't know it at the time. I must have been probably about 11 or 12 at the time. And yes, a pal's brother had one, and my pal and I took the centre section out, put it in the water and sat in it like an overgrown fish box.
Neither end?
No, the ends were left ashore. We didn't put them together.
What was it like to sit in? I'd imagine it'd be a bit scary because it'd be so open.
Yes, it was on its own. It was not very stable. It was just like sitting in an oversized fish box.
That was probably John Marshall's first go at a canoe, and he refined it by then. By this time, the one we're looking at now, the Queensferry. To
the best of my knowledge, the Lochaber was his first canoe. John Marshall is quite an innovative person. He was involved in a lot more than building canoes.
Made hen houses, apparently.
Yes, out of reinforced concrete. And he was also, his family was very much...
Foxes wouldn't get through that. Sorry.
One of his family was evidently into making rubber materials, and the stuff he used to cover his canoes was probably ahead of its time. It was very lightweight, multi-layered cotton bonded with rubber, so it was a rubberised material that he used. But by the time this framework was picked up, that had sort of long since gone. You could say he was an inventor in many ways, but the Queensferry was definitely an improvement. And he also had a double version, which I have never seen in real life at all. And he also had a junior version, a sort of kiddies kayak. I've only seen these from a catalogue that unfortunately I don't have. I've got a photocopy of it somewhere, but I've only seen that catalogue once. We're
standing directly underneath this boat now. It's skeletons above our heads. And looking from the backrest, it almost seems as if the cockpit to right where your feet would be, if that's the footrest there, is it, yeah?
Looks kind of like it.
Yeah. So it's almost open from the feet, from your backrest to the feet, only by then it's become a V shape. It's not very high, is it, for your feet?
No, there's sufficient height in the deck to get your feet in, but even although that was a big open cockpit, I mean, it was used with what's now called a spray deck. We always called it a spray sheet. A deck we always thought was something rather solid that you got in a ship, but never mind.
Yeah, and this would be suitable for obviously quite big paddles.
Yes, I mean the members of the Hostlers Club went all over the west coast of Scotland in these boats, crossed the Minch. And they canoed in the Outer Hebrides and all over. But the design was also used initially on the rivers. There's some photographs in existence of that at Thistle Brig in the Tay, for instance. And when if you look up at the stringers there's the remains of rubbing strips on the outside. All these longitudinal members all had rubbing strips on the outside of the canvas, so that if you're going down the river and hit a rock, it was the rubbing strip that took the wear, not the covering material.
And you've got some pictures of this boat in action, have you?
I've got some pictures, yes, and also John Marshall wrote a book about his canoes, and there's some very good pictures of them in there at Thistle Brig in the Tay.
Do you think you've got those pictures, do you say, in the other room?
Mm-hmm.
Can we take a look at those?
That's just to let you see a picture of the big old-fashioned kind of open canoe that they used in the loch. All of that batch there are Queensferry seniors.
So this is what we've just been looking at?
That's just what you've been looking at. You can see there's the long cockpit, whereas some of the later ones, if you look at that, I'm not sure, I've got the glass out.
Yes, it's squared off at the back.
Some of it's squared off, so these are all Queensferry seniors. These are also mostly Queensferry seniors, but that's featuring Hamish Gow, who's quite a character in Scottish canoeing. The two down here show you Loch Lomond canoes. That, to me, was the first kayak, recreational kayak, that I know of that was designed specifically for sea touring. These were meant for the sea and the river. That was built for nothing but sea touring.
The Loch Lomond?
The Loch Lomond. Just a sort of personal kind of interest, that's where we started to go down the lines of the modern sea kayak. That's the Clyde Single, which was based on an Eskimo kayak. That design was produced 10 years before any of the modern kind of style glass fibre boats appeared. And a lot of people think that doubles in canoeing were quite a modern thing. These are all twin cockpit doubles designed specifically from the word go for sea touring, long before even the Anisakutabe came on the market. And just as a matter of interest, some of the characters that were involved, that was Hamish, and a very, very prominent figure in Scottish history, Sir Robert Grieve, who was the chairman of the Scottish Council of Development Industry. He was also a member of the Scottish Hostlers Canoe Club. Very well connected.
Just looking at this Queensferry here, how different would it have felt paddling something like that has a mast that there with a liner into the front and back? How different would it have felt to paddling the sort of boats people paddle now?
Initially a lot more stable. I dare say a bit more sluggish, but some of these boats paddle surprisingly well. For instance, I've paddled a clinker-built canoe which became known as...
What's a clinker?
Overlapped wooden planking. This boat was built back in the 1870s and it became known as the Clyde Canoe because it became very popular with the members of the Clyde Canoe Club. Well, I've paddled one of these in Loch Lomond within recent years, and it's surprisingly easy to paddle, a very comfortable boat to paddle.
So when you see this young man here, stripped to the waist, with his sail furled around the mast there, sticking out the boat of his Queensferry, it would have actually been a comfortable paddle. He could have taken that quite a distance.
Yeah, in these boats...
He's on Loch Lomond there, isn't he? In North Inchmurren.
Yes, a lot of these are in Loch Lomond because that's where the Hostlers' boathouse was. But, if you take that picture there, that's out at Iona. These fellows went all over. In fact, Hamish Gow and Alec McLaren, they set off in the late 40s to paddle around Scotland. So, they did the same kind of things as people do now. There are very, very few places around this country that have been visited in glass fibre boats that have not first been visited in canvas or wooden boats, like St Kilda, like crossing to all the way up to the Shetlands from, starting the west coast of Scotland and just going on a trip, and you end up in the Shetlands in Lerwick. One of my friends did that in a canvas-covered boat.
What would it be like going through big water? I'm thinking back of Dunnett's description of going through the Doris Moor. When he talks about it felt like hands in the water trying to grab the paddles. And he says something now, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like it felt like horses below our boats steadying themselves and galloping and kicking at the bottom of the boats. Because it's so thin in canvas, you've got that immediate experience. How different would that sort of thing feel?
Well, you've paddled in tide races. It's a lot different, but where the difference is, yes, your heels might be against the canvas. And you would actually feel the movement of the water, and the boat is flexible. You actually feel the boat moving. That's a difference, but they're just as capable as far as handling rough water is concerned. If you see some of the modern videos of some of the stuff the Greenlanders paddle in, it would make your hair stand on end.
I'm just looking at the way they're laced into these things with their spray skirts.
Spray sheets, we call them, spray sheets. Laced in, yes, they're laced in, but they're not done in such a manner that you would be likely to be trapped in. It's Dutch lacing. You undo one bit and the rest just rips open like a zip almost. So it's like the fallacy that the Greenlanders laced themselves into their boats. They didn't lace themselves in. Their jackets, their tulex were very tight in the cockpit hook, but they didn't lace themselves in. And
you were saying to me earlier that what we now know as cruising grew up from canoes and kayaks rather than down from bigger yachts, which is an interesting development.
That's correct. The Victorians developed the sailing canoe on two fronts. They developed it for cruising, and the main exponents of that were the Clyde Canoe Club based in Loch Lomond, but also it was developed down south along the racing lines. And modern small yacht cruising really grew up out of sailing canoes. That's quite correct. But the sails that you see the Hostlers using here, they were just small auxiliary sails to use in downwind sailing. And if you notice, they're all red. These pictures are all from the 1940s, when there was still a vast amount of material available ex-War Department. And these are all one-man rubber dinghy sails. The mast is telescopic aluminium, and if you look closer you'll see on the red there's lots of little white marks. That's the instructions of how to use them, printed on them for the benefit of the ditched airmen.
They look like they're having a good day, don't they?
Of course, people enjoyed their paddling then every bit as much as they do now.
And this was when?
Most of these were the 40s, early 50s.
60 years ago.
The Loch Lomond there, it was designed in 1948, after the war.
That's the one we saw first in there.
The materials were very hard to come by after the war. I mean, you actually needed a licence to go and buy timber. So they were designed to be built out of readily available materials and to be very easy to be built. And they fulfilled their role very well indeed for a number of years. Originally designed within the Scottish Hostlers Canoe Club, but the sort of key designer subsequently became involved very much in the setting up of the Irvine Canoe Club. And if you like, the Mark II Loch Lomans became what is known as the Irvine type of the Loch Lomond canoe, because there was a number of boat builders in the Irvine Canoe Club, so they introduced a few sophistications, not in the overall design, but in the build of them.
Getting back to the Canoe Boys thing, the Loch Harbour, the early design there, the Queensferry, much more successful design than the one that the Canoe Boys paddled up their coast in, really.
I don't see much record of the use of the Loch Harbour out with really the Canoe Boys story, and it was certainly an innovative design in allowing a boat to be more easily transported. But a lot of the people that were involved in kayaking in those days were, I hesitate to use middle class, but they were usually people that had a reasonable income, and they could maybe afford to buy some of the continental built folding canoes. And in the 30s there was a vast range of those available. We tend to think nowadays of Clipper. Clipper was only one of a whole number of designs from the continent.
And they're the ones that Loch Harbour were competing with?
Yes, in a way. I would suggest the Loch Harbour was aimed at a slightly lower end of the market price-wise.
But it didn't hang around as a design, it was quickly...
No, it was the rigid versions were so much more usable. For a start, there was much more space to store stuff if you're going away with your camping equipment. So it was very, very rapidly overtaken by simply development in the sport. The first time a canoe was ever rolled in a slalom competition in Scotland, and it was in the middle of a slalom in Thistle Brig, and the bloke that capsized was Ian Pendleton from Fourth Canoe Club, and a big cheer went up. Before that, rolling tended to be a thing that was practiced at the interval in swimming galas. A lot of the members of the Tay Canoe Club could roll. That's where most of us learned to roll from. But it was never seriously thought of as something you would do out for real life with a loaded seaboat. Things have changed tremendously with the coaching. So many things happened at the one time. The coaching scheme coming along, the education system taking aboard outdoor activities, glass fibre coming along. All these things came together to give a fantastic, boost in the numbers of canoeists, and skills have developed, beyond all recognition.
So is this more like going out for a hill walk or for a bike tour, but you just happen to be on the water?
Something like that, yes. The advantage you had in the canoe, of course, was that you didn't carry your pack. Your boat carried it. You could get to lots of lovely little nooks round the coast that you couldn't really conveniently get to any other way. And apart from that, enjoying, the wildlife, the scenery and everything else, the actual process of paddling and canoeing to some people was very enjoyable. So it brought together a whole lot of features which made it a very good pastime.
And in bad weather?
One of the biggest skills then and now is knowing when not to go.
Presumably, if you didn't have the range of rolls and the range of equipment and dry suits and all that kind of tackle, they paddled less frequently then, or were they just harder?
Certainly, your quit level was far lower, because the skills were lower. It's not so much that they didn't have the skills. They hadn't been developed yet in recreational canoeing. So they weren't there to learn at that point.
Right.
Oh, right, the Inuit and the American Indian and the open canoe had these skills thousands of years ago, but it took recreational canoeing a long time to catch up with that. And in some respects they didn't until they actually went back and started to use craft a bit more akin to the native craft. Now, I'm counting out of this things like your modern river boats. I mean, the sort of the short plastic fun boats have got no direct link downstream to the Inuit boat. But the boat we looked at over there, the Folder, the Austrian boat, that was the kind of boat they were using in the 30s for first-time descents of alpine rivers. These were river-running boats. Now, think of the difference between these boats and what they're using now. And the Germans were using these boats in the 30s and just after the war, to go to places like Spitsbergen and all over. People think, that modern, glass fibre sea canoe was invented in this country. No, people have been doing it for far longer than that. Far longer.
That is a slice of kayaking history, and I don't just mean the boats. Duncan Winning was very generous with his time, and I felt, rather honoured that he showed me around that astonishing collection. If you want to hear more from Duncan, there's another podcast already published. He tells me how he started kayaking and talks of his contribution to the sport, a contribution for which he was awarded the OBE. You'll find that and many more podcasts in the podcast library of seakayakroots.com. And if you want to know more about our voyage, look at a different website, and that's canoeboys.co.uk. I'm Simon Willis. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programmes. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.